Most people think financial abuse starts with stolen money. It does T. It starts with one sentence. Let me handle everything. In this shocking real lifestyle drama, a woman lands a massive client, only for her unemployed husband to suddenly declare himself the financial genius of the family. But hidden under his office floorboards is a ledger exposing 6 years of lies, secret losses, and a lifestyle entirely funded by her success. This is to just a marriage story. It is a masterclass in silent financial manipulation.
That's it. I'm handling our money now. My husband Mark's voice cut through the airs as I landed a major new architectural project. He insisted I was too impulsive with spending. Stung by his condescending tone in front of our builder, I simply
nodded.
That night, searching for renovation plans on our family tablet, I saw a new app synced to his account. A secret budget tracker. What I found inside made my heart stop, and the life I thought we were building together crumbled into dust. That's it! I'm taking over the finances, Mark announced, standing in the middle of our half-gutted dream kitchen. I was holding the blueprints I'd spent 100 hours perfecting, the design that would finally make our house a home. My home. My hands were rock steady. They didn't show the earthquake, starting in my chest as I replayed the last 5 years, how I'd built my career around his fragile ego, not realizing I'd completely erased myself. Before we get into this story, thank you for joining our community where we share these important experiences. If you believe emotional and financial labor deserves respect, please subscribe to our channel. It's free and helps us support more people. Now, back to the disaster unfolding in my kitchen. He stood there in an expensive tech bro hoodie, the kind that says, I'm a founder, but never actually founds anything, all of it bought with my money. He watched me, ready for an argument. He had a whole speech prepared, I could tell, one he'd probably rehearsed while watching motivational videos, convincing himself he was the sensible one, the financial genius. I wasn't sure what he was protecting us from. From now on, I manage everything, he said, his confidence growing in my silence. Your salary gets deposited into an account I control. You'll get an allowance. S for our future. Our future. The words felt sharp and bitter. I carefully rolled up the blueprints and turned to face him. Okay, Mark, if that's what you think is best. He just stared at me. This wasn't part of his plan. He was ready for a fight, for me to defend my position as a partner at my firm, to list all the projects I'd managed. He needed me to protest so he could call me emotional and prove his point, justifying this hostile takeover of my life. Really? He actually took a step back, completely off balance. Just like that? Just like that, I confirmed, my voice eerily calm. We can sort it all out on Monday. You can have total control. Relief flooded his face. So pure it was almost funny. Good, great. It's the responsible thing to do. He started to leave, but then paused at the door, unable to stop himself from getting in one last dig. Maybe now we can finally start building some actual generational wealth. Then he was gone, heading to his office to network on LinkedIn, a hobby that I was, it turned out, paying for. I stood alone, smelling sawdust and drywall and something else. Something burning our marriage, I realized, its slow burn finally reaching the rafters. My impulsive spending. I looked around the room I had designed and was single-handedly funding. The imported Danish chair I'd found at an estate sale. The custom steel frame windows I'd negotiated a deal for. The paintings from a local artist I'd supported because Mark said we couldn't afford art, just before he dropped $2,000 on a startup celebration weekend that went nowhere. This room, this house, our life. I had designed it, financed it, and paid for every single permit, while Mark posted on social media about the grind and disrupting the industry to his 200 followers. I picked up the tablet and sat on the dusty floorboards. For a moment, all I saw was my own exhausted reflection in the dark screen. When did I start to look like a guest in my own house? When did the dark circles under my eyes become a permanent part of my face? Then I remembered the app. I tapped the icon and it opened right up. It wasn't just a budget. It was a confession. page after page, in his meticulously organized categories, documenting 5 years of our marriage. The mortgage payments, from my salary, the property taxes, from my annual bonus, the renovation costs, from my investment account, groceries, vacations, utilities, all neatly logged under a column he'd labelled Clara's Income. That trip to Denver, he told everyone, was paid for by an early investor. $6,000 on my credit card. His business expenses were a comedy of errors. Web hosting fees, $300 a month. Subscriptions to tech newsletters, $150 a month. A new productivity laptop for $3,000. A standing desk for $1,000 that he barely used. His investments in various dead-end app ideas were shocking. Thousands at a time, all quietly covered by the steady income from my architectural firm. I opened a spreadsheet on my own laptop, my fingers moving automatically. It was a cold, clinical process. Date, item, amount, and funding source. The first year appeared on the screen. My contribution to our household was $85,000. Mark's was $0. Year 2, I put in $110,000. He spent $3,000. Years 3, 4, and 5 told the exact same story. My income surged when I was made a partner at the firm. His contributions were a mix of wishful thinking and actual, tangible expenses, all paid by me. The final total made me feel sick to my stomach. My total contribution, $580,000. Mark's, a net loss of over $10,000. I had paid for more than 100% of our life for 5 years, while he told me I was financially irresponsible, while he built this entire fantasy of being a tech founder on a foundation of my hard work. I wasn't his partner, I was his venture capitalist. I was his safety net, his bank, his incubator, and his only source of revenue, all rolled into one tired, overworked person. And he had the nerve to put me on an allowance. I named the spreadsheet Mark Seed Funding, XLX, and saved it to the cloud, an external hard drive, and a small USB stick I tucked away. I leaned back, the damning figures glowing in the dark. This was irrefutable. This was evidence. This was the leverage I never wanted, but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. Because my career as an architect taught me one thing. A detailed blueprint always wins against a pretty but hollow facade. He could tell whatever story he wanted about his brilliant ideas and my careless spending, but numbers don't have an ego. Numbers don't lie to protect your feelings. I thought about the promotion I'd just accepted last month. Lead architect at Skyline Structures, a gorgeous corner office with a view of the entire city, a company car, a 40% raise that pushed my annual income into a whole new bracket. I'd come home bursting with the news, wanting to tell Mark, already planning a celebratory dinner at the city's best restaurant. Maybe we could finally afford that lakeside cabin I'd been looking at, a real asset. But he just looked up from his screen and said, "Nice. That'll extend our financial runway. Not congratulations, honey. Not I am so unbelievably proud of you. Just a cold, detached analysis of how my success could better subserve his own narrative. I tried to share my excitement, the new high-rise project I would lead, the junior architects I would get to mentor. He just nodded, his attention already drifting back to the tech articles on his monitor. He dismissed my career milestone with the chilling indifference of someone who sees their partner not as a person, but as a resource. That night, I made his favourite dinner anyway. I grilled the perfect steak. I opened a bottle of wine we were saving for a special occasion, desperate to force a moment of connection. He ate while scrolling through Twitter on his phone, muttering about changing the paradigm and the next unicorn. I watched him and felt something deep inside me finally give way. It wasn't a crack, it was a clean break. The life we'd built wasn't just flawed, it was a lie. I'd told myself that funding his ambitions was a form of love and support, but it was just the slow-motion destruction of my own worth. My friend Sarah asked me over coffee last week if Mark was my husband or my most demanding startup. The question had landed like a punch. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to laugh it off. "Well, you're always managing his cash flow, she said, redesigning his home office." calming him down when another one of his big ideas falls through. My own brother gets less support from his actual investors, she added. I deflected with some comment about how all geniuses are a little high maintenance, but her words stuck with me. When did I become his unpaid CFO instead of his wife? When did his financial and emotional well-being become my sole responsibility? When did I stop being a partner and become the silent investor he simply took for granted? The answers were all laid out in the spreadsheet. 5 years of my contributions growing while his debts mounted. A gradual chipping away at my self-respect until I forgot I was even supposed to have any. I closed my laptop. The kitchen was a chaotic ghost of the celebration I'd been planning when Mark dropped his financial bombshell. We were supposed to host my boss for dinner tomorrow. A dinner I had promised for months we'd finally have. Another party I would organise. Another meal I would buy, cook, and clean up after. Another performance of the perfect power couple, where I did all the work and Mark just showed up, ready to charm everyone with his big talk about the future of tech. I grabbed my phone and opened our group chat. Hey guys, so sorry. Have to rain check the barbecue this weekend. Something has come up. The replies were a flood of no worries and hope all is okay. Then I texted Leo, probably holding court with his co-founder at some trendy Austin whiskey bar on my dime. Barbecue is off. We need to finalise the separate accounts like you wanted. I'm free Saturday to get it done. His response was instant. Awesome. The sooner the better. I smiled at the screen. He had absolutely no idea what he'd just agreed to. That separate meant I was no longer his personal venture capitalist. No more home-cooked meals, a spotless house, or footing the bill for his fantasy company. He had zero idea that 50-50 meant exactly that he was now responsible for half the mortgage on a house he could never afford alone, half the bills he never saw, and half the groceries he never bought. He was oblivious that his charmed life, the one he credited to his own visionarious hustle, was about to implode. Because I was just done being his silent partner, his safety net, done bankrolling an ego trip while he dismissed my own career wins with a jealous shrug. Leo wanted separate accounts. He was about to get his wish, with no fine print. And he was finally going to see the real price tag on my support. The spreadsheet on my screen was a brutal kind of truth, all told in numbers. I sat there in the dark, the laptop's glow on my face, watching 5 years of our marriage reduced to rows and columns that couldn't lie. Every year, the story was identical. My income from the architectural firm went up. Leo's contribution was a flat, sad line, maybe $800 a month, if he wasn't buying new gear. I created a new tab and called it Gamers Folly ROI. That was for his esports platform, the big dream he'd been building for 2 years while I built our actual life. The total I'd poured in, $52,500, for server costs, high-end graphics cards, coding boot camps, marketing, custom jerseys for team branding, and trips to gaming conventions. The total it had earned, $4,100. I just stared at that figure. $4,100 in 2 years. That's not even $170 a month. It barely covered the gigabit internet he called a non-negotiable business expense, as math was sickening. For every dollar his startup brought in, I had invested $13 just to keep the lights on. This wasn't a company. It was a money pit of a hobby I was funding. I opened another tab, unpaid labour. This one hurt. It was all the work I did on autopilot, things I'd stopped even thinking of as work. Grocery runs and meal prep, 7 hours a week. Cooking, 9 hours. Cleaning, 5 hours a week. Laundry, 3 hours. Managing the household finances, appointments, and contractors, another 4. That's at least 28 hours a week. At $60 an hour, less than a house manager, that comes out to $1,680 a week. That's over $87,000 a year in work I wasn't paid for. Add that to the financial hole, and my total yearly contribution was easily $150,000. Leo's was maybe $16,000 if you were being generous. Just then, my phone lit up. A text from Leo, out with his buddies. Long night, don't wait up. I sighed and did the mental math. He and his crew loved those craft cocktail bars on Rainy Street, where one drink is $18. He'd have 5 easy, plus some fancy tacos. $120, gone, all on the joint credit card I was about to pay off for the very last time. Soon, the accounts would be separate, and Leo's bar tabs would finally be his own problem. I saved the spreadsheet and closed the laptop, plunging the kitchen into darkness. Outside, the familiar sounds of a Sunday night, a distant train, a neighbour's screen door filled the air. Inside, there was only silence. I sat in it and felt something new. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was clarity. A cold, hard clarity about the man I married versus the man I'd pretended he was. Monday morning arrived with the thick, heavy heat of a Texas dawn, making the world feel slow and sticky. I got up at 6, same as always, but this morning I only made coffee for one. I pulled out my favourite mug, a ceramic one I bought at an art fair in Marfa. Leo had claimed it a while back, saying it was the perfect size, which really meant, I want this, so it's mine. I'd stopped arguing about things like that years ago. It was easier to let him win the small things to avoid a bigger fight, but we never had the bigger fights. I just shrank myself, bit by bit, until I barely took up any space. That was over. I made my coffee with purpose. I used the French press he always called too pretentious. I weighed the beans, let them bloom. It felt deliberate. I made myself a real breakfast, too. Migas with fresh cilantro from the patio. Toast with that expensive jam I usually saved for company. At 7:30, Leo emerged from the bedroom, looking exactly as expected. Sleepy, entitled, and assuming his day was already laid out for him. He stopped cold at the kitchen entrance. The coffee maker was off. There was no plate of food waiting for him on the counter. It was just me at the breakfast bar with my laptop eating my solo meal. "Is there coffee?" he asked. Not mad, just bewildered, like a kid whose parents changed the rules overnight. I didn't look up from my email. The beans are in the cabinet. There's milk in the fridge. You can make toast if you want. A long silence followed. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding, trying to process this break from routine. "You didn't make breakfast?" I finally looked at him. "Separate accounts, Leo. Separate lives. This is what you wanted, remember? Independence." His mouth formed a tight line. I watched him search for a comeback. For any angle that didn't make him a total hypocrite, he found nothing. He just grabbed a granola bar from a box I'd bought and wouldn't be buying again and walked out. I heard the front door slam, the car start, the garage door whine open and shut, and then quiet. The silence felt different this time. It wasn't just clarity anymore, it was lighter. It felt a lot like freedom. For 5 years, I was his producer. Coffee ready, dry cleaning picked up, breakfast served. His entire morning pre-packaged for him. His morning was a perfectly choreographed show I ran so he didn't have to think. Now the director was off the clock. During my lunch break, I made a new spreadsheet, shared household costs. This was for our future. I detailed it all. Mortgage, $3,800 a month. His share, $1,900. Property taxes, $600 a month. His share, $300. Homeowners insurance, $180 a month. His share, $90. Utilities average $400 a month. His half, $200. Internet and streaming, $160 a month. His half, $80. Yard maintenance, $200 a month. Half, $100. The grand total came to $2,670 a month. And that was before groceries, car payments, or any of his personal spending. This was simply the cost of living in our house. The house I'd been bankrolling while he tossed in his $800 and called us partners. I created a shared folder with automatic payment alerts. A clean, corporate system where every bill automatically requested his 50% share. No arguments, just data. The first request went out Wednesday. The quarterly water bill was $380. I looked at the total and started typing. Our internet and cable package was insane, mostly because of the premium sports channels Leo had to have and the fibre optic speed he needed for his gaming. He always called it a business cost for his startup. I called it an expensive hobby. He'd call me cheap, and I'd pay the bill. Then he'd post his online victories with captions about his relentless hustle. I sent a payment request for $190 with a simple note, "Hey, you're half of the utilities." His text came back immediately. "This is crazy." "For the internet?" I replied. "You owe half. This is how separate accounts work. Need it by the end of the week." The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then just one word, whatever. The transfer landed on Thursday. I could practically taste his anger through the banking app. No note, no nothing. Just a number, sent with pure spite. Good, let him stew in it. Let him feel an ounce of what I felt every time I had to fund his latest game-changing startup idea. Every time he bought a new gadget he needed for work while telling me to cut back on groceries. 2 weeks into our financial separation, my phone rang. Jenna's name lit up the screen, and my stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. Years of being sized up by the woman who raised the man, who saw my income as his seed funding. Mia, sweetie. Her voice was smooth as honey, but sharp as glass, the kind that could win any argument. "I'm coming by for dinner Sunday. Liam mentioned you're doing that incredible beef Wellington of yours." Incredible? I made it exactly twice. Both times for her. Both times because Liam had signed me up for a full day of cooking without a word. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat and came out as a quiet breath. "That's not happening." "Jenna, I'm not cooking on Sunday." The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with all the rules I had just shattered. "I'm sorry?" Her voice went warm to ice cold. Insulted, baffled. "Liam and I are handling our own finances now," I said, my voice steady, the same one I used with stubborn building inspectors. "A big meal like that just isn't in my budget at the moment." "You're still welcome, of course. But dinner will be up to you." More silence. I could almost hear her brain trying to compute this new version of me, the one who wasn't her personal chef. "But Sunday dinner is what we do, Mia. It's tradition. A tradition of me in the kitchen all day, of her telling Liam how lucky he was to have me. A tradition of him eating my food while telling me I was spending too much. Then Liam can cook," I said simply, "or you can order something in. Your choice." I hung up before she could even start to argue. It was polite, final, and non-negotiable. I went straight to my calendar and blocked off Sunday. I called the event the audit. Just 4 days. 4 days until Jenna arrived expecting a 4-course meal and got a reality check. 4 days until this whole charade fell apart. The week passed in that weird, hyper-focused way it does before a hurricane hits. Every small talk with Liam felt like trying to read between the lines. Every simple salad I made for myself felt like a small victory. Every bill that arrived was just more proof for a verdict that was already in. I got home Wednesday night, and the kitchen looked like a bomb had gone off. And not Liam's usual mess of leaving coffee grounds everywhere. This was total anarchy. Pots were everywhere. The butcher block was covered in something, and I definitely smelled smoke. Liam's was hunched over the island, his phone leaning on a stack of cookbooks, watching a tutorial called Easiest Beef Wellington Ever. I put my portfolio down and just stared. He was so focused he didn't hear me come in. It was the same intense look he got when he was studying pitch decks, always searching for a quick path to a big payout. "What are you doing?" I asked. He jolted, nearly spilling a bottle of wine he had open. My good Merlot, naturally. Not the cheap stuff we use for braising. Just a dry run. He shot back, instantly on the defensive. For Sunday, I took in the disaster zone. The pastry was ripped to shreds. The mushroom paste was a grey puddle. A plume of smoke was pouring from a skillet on the burner. "Want some help?" I asked, curious to see his reaction, his teeth ground together. "I can handle it." I just shrugged and went to the living room. I got a glass of water and just listened to him battling a recipe the video promised was foolproof. 10 minutes later, I heard him swear, then the high-pitched wail of the smoke detector. I walked back in to find him frantically waving a dish towel at it, as the pan sent up clouds of black smoke. He burned the garlic, tossed it into a scorching hot pan instead of letting it soften slowly. The whole kitchen now smelled sharp and bitter, a smell that would ruin everything else he cooked in it. "You have to start garlic in a cold pan with oil," I said over the alarm screech. "It burns in seconds." He acted like I wasn't there, just swiped at the detector until it went quiet. I turned around and went to get changed. I heard the pan slam us into the sink, the violent sizzle of water hitting hot fat, and another perfectly chosen swear word. An hour later, the kitchen was a battlefield. Every single dish we owned was dirty. Flour dusted everything. Something gooey was now welded to the floor tiles. The trash can was overflowing with packaging from the butcher and the store. Charred carrots, a destroyed mushroom reduction, and a cut of beef that was somehow both uncooked and burnt. Liam stood in the centre of the mess, looking totally broken. "Why is this so difficult?" he muttered, mostly to himself. "How do you make it look so easy?" I could have told him, "Practice, preparation. You can't just wing it like one of your business pitches." But I kept quiet. I just surveyed the wreckage he'd made trying to copy something I could do in my sleep. He pulled out his phone and started tapping. A few minutes later, I heard him. "Yes, I need a delivery for Sunday at 1 p.m. The chef's menu for 3, please." "Yes, the one with the beef feature. No, that address is right." My brain was already running the numbers. Aria's chef's menu was $200 a head. 3 people, plus the private courier fee, tax, and a 20% tip. Over $700. Easy. Money I knew for a fact Liam did not have. It would go on the same credit card he was meant to be clearing after his last sure-thing tech venture imploded. He ended the call and saw me standing there. "Mom adores Aria," he said. Like that explained everything. "I know," I said. "I've gotten her takeout from there for her birthday the last 3 years." His face fell. "Cheers?" Just for a second. I saw it the realization of another hidden task I always took care of. Another bill I would have just paid. Another piece of his mother's life I was expected to manage so he could look like the successful doting son. Saturday evening, I was on the couch with a pile of architectural journals. I actually had a free night now that I wasn't planning meals and coordinating Liam's social life. He was in the kitchen again. I heard him moving about. Cabinets opening, the clink of plates, the sound of the dishwasher. At about 9:30, he came into the room. "Delivery is set for 1 o'clock, he said. "Mom gets here at 1, so the timing will be perfect." I just nodded, not taking my eyes off the page. "I'm going to go ahead and set the table now. With the good silver," I said. "Okay." He stood there a moment, clearly waiting for me to say something, to praise him for trying. I gave him nothing, just turned a page in my journal. He walked back to the dining room. I heard the hutch open, the quiet sound of our wedding china being set out. He came back 20 minutes later. "Where are the cloth napkins?" "Linen closet, top shelf, on the left." I heard him bustling around again, pretending to be the perfect host for his mother. I flipped another page and let a tiny smile touch my lips. Sunday morning was bright and beautiful. I slept in until 8, which felt like a miracle, and made myself a pot of coffee. I put on an old pair of sweatpants. It seemed like a great day to finally organize the garage. By 10:30, I was on the back porch, surrounded by tools and storage bins, when Sarah Evans from next door appeared at the fence. "Morning, Mia," she said, a mug in her hand. "Got a busy day?" I just sort of pointed back at the house. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Liam polishing wine glasses that were already spotless, moving them an inch to the left, then back again. "Liam's mom is coming over," I told her, pulling a weed. Sarah rested her arms on the fence. "Everything okay over here?" She paused. "Mark said he thought he heard—" "Mark is her husband, a lawyer whose office looks right into our kitchen." "What did Mark hear?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat. He said it sounded like there were some intense talks last week. Not a fight exactly, but tense. "We just wanted to check in." I could have just laughed it off, smiled and said it was nothing, just a stressful week at work. But I looked straight at Sarah. She's a therapist. She listens to people for a living. She knows when something's off. "We're in the middle of a reorganization," I told her. Like a hostile takeover, you might say. Her eyes widened. "That sounds intense. I wiped the dust off my hands onto my pants. It's not so complicated. We're just finally admitting who really owns the company. Sarah just nodded, a look of complete understanding on her face. I could see her piecing it all together, reading between the lines of what I'd said. Setting new rules, she repeated. You mean financially? I mean we're living in reality now, I told her. A reality totally different from the story Liam was telling himself. Jenna's face softened with understanding, and then with a sense of alliance. Okay, she said gently. If you ever need to vent, or just want a cup of tea, I'm right here. She gave my arm a quick squeeze and went back inside. I tried to focus on my garden, but the roses were just a blur of colour. I'd just planted a seed with our neighbour, Susan, a witness. Someone to see the perfect facade crack before it shattered. At 7:15 I went inside to wash up. The dining room table looked beautiful, I'll give Ethan that. Our best china was set out, linen napkins folded into fans. The wine was chilling. Bags from Le Ciel, the best restaurant in town, sat on the counter. Ethan emerged from the bedroom, wearing a new polo shirt, playing the part for his mother, the doting husband, even if our marriage was bankrupt. She's 5 minutes away, he said. I looked down at my own clothes, smudged leggings and a faded hoodie, my hair in a messy bun. I know, I said, heading for the stairs. When I came back down in a simple black dress, Isabel S. Silver Lexus was gliding into the driveway. Ethan puffed out his chest, ready for the show. I watched him from the living room with a strange, detached calm. No anxiety, no desire to help him sell the lie. I just wanted to watch what happened when his mother finally met the man he really was. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:30. Isabel was never a minute late. Ethan swung the door open. Mother, you're right on time. She breezed by him, a wave of expensive perfume in her wake, her sharp eyes finding me instantly. Maya. Her voice alone could make a room feel 10 degrees colder. I had survived 6 years of that voice, 6 years of passive-aggressive suggestions about my career, my cooking, my life. 6 years of never being good enough for the man who was bleeding me dry. Isabel, it's so lovely to have you, I replied, my own voice perfectly even. She glided toward the dining table, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped dead. The table was stunning, the silverware gleamed. It was a picture of domestic bliss, except for the tower of branded takeout containers from Le Ciel sitting right in the middle, still in their paper bag. Isabel's expression morphed. First confusion, then a flicker of disbelief, then outright disapproval. What is all this? Her voice was sharp. I thought you were making your famous risotto? Ethan immediately jumped in to manage the situation. We decided to treat you, Mother. I ordered from Le Ciel. I know how much you love their food. You ordered? She turned on him like he'd just admitted to arson. Why didn't Maya cook? Her eyes shot back to me, waiting, accusing. This was the moment. The opening I'd been waiting for all month. I walked into the room holding a glass of wine, totally relaxed. Because 4-course dinners are no longer a service I provide for free. Isabel. Provide for free? She echoed, the words sounding absurd to her. Ethan wanted to separate our finances, I explained, my tone light and breezy. So now everything is split right down the middle. All the work, too. He was on dinner duty, and he took care of it by ordering $400 worth of takeout. I let that number hang in the air. I watched Isabel's mind, the mind of a retired auditor, start to churn. Ethan, she said, turning to face him. You spent $400 on dinner? He shifted his weight. It's fine, Mom. It's not a big deal. The lie was so weak, it was practically begging to be broken. Isn't it? I asked softly. Because your half of the mortgage is due Monday. That's $2,400. And we have $300 for the car payments. And another $500 for the credit card you were supposed to pay off. That comes to $3,200, Ethan. The blood drained from his face. Isabel stared at him, and her expression was something I'd never witnessed. It wasn't just disappointment, it was colder, calculating. Ethan James, she said, using his full name. What is she talking about? Ethan's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked trapped. Her question just sat in the silence between them, a ticking bomb. What is she talking about? I watched him search for an escape route. He couldn't deny it. I had just stated the exact amounts. Getting angry would just make him look pathetic. He tried to sound reasonable. Mother, it's not that simple. Maya is being dramatic. I'm not being dramatic at all, I interjected, my voice quiet but firm. Your half of our monthly expenses is $3,850. That's half the mortgage, half the property taxes, half the utilities, half of everything. It is all in our shared charge budget tracker. Isabel S.'s entire demeanour shifted. I was watching a lifetime of professional skepticism take over. Her posture straightened. Her face became a blank slate. When she finally spoke, her voice was the precise, analytical tone of an auditor starting a review. Maya, she said, turning her full attention to me, what exactly is your half of the shared expenses? It was the question I knew she would ask. I put my wine glass down and met her gaze directly. The same as Ethan's, I told her. We split every single household bill 50-50. It was his idea. Isabel S.'s eyes narrowed just a fraction. And what is your total monthly contribution? I could have softened it. I could have made excuses for him, for us. I was done doing that. About $3,900 for my share of the bills, plus my own car, insurance, food, and personal costs. So, somewhere around $4,800 a month. I watched her absorb that. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, running the numbers, looking for the imbalance she knew must be there. And prior to this 50-50 plan, she asked. That was it. The question that would blow the whole thing wide open. Before this plan, I was covering about $8,000 a month. Ethan was contributing on average $600. The silence in the room was absolute. Isabel just stood there, her face a canvas of colliding emotions. Shock, confusion, and something that almost looked like betrayal. That cannot be accurate, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was a woman who lived by the numbers. She knew I wouldn't invent them. Oh, it's accurate, I said. I have the household ledger right here if you'd like to see it. Yes, Isabel said, her voice clipped and decisive. I would. Ethan made a strangled noise. Mom, you don't need to get involved. This is our business. Ethan. Isabel S.'s voice cut through his whining like glass. Be quiet. I went to the bookshelf in the living room, pulled out a thick leather-bound binder, and brought it back. I opened it on the table, a meticulously organised record. I handed it to her. 6 years of bank statements, pay stubs, credit card bills, and receipts. Every dollar accounted for. Every expense categorised. Isabel took the binder like it was a critical piece of evidence in a fraud case. Which, I suppose, it was. She flipped straight to the summary page. The one with the colour-coded charts breaking down our contributions by quarter. The story was identical for 6 straight years. My income paid for roughly 90% of our life. His covered about 10%. At the very bottom, I had typed out the grand totals in bold. My contribution, $576,000. Ethan's, $72,000. Isabel S.'s hand trembled, a tiny, almost unnoticeable tremor. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning line items. Ethan's golf membership, $400 a month. His client lunches, $600, nearly every month. His brand consultant tab was the biggest section. Custom suits, new camera gear, yearly website redesigns, business trips to New York and Austin. Every single charge was on my credit cards, while he lectured me about my spending habits. Oh my God, Isabel whispered, more to herself than to us. Ethan stepped toward her. Mom, you don't get it. I had to build my image. How much has this image earned? Isabel asked, her gaze fixed on the page. Silence. Ethan, what were your total business earnings in the last 12 months? Still nothing. About $5,000, I answered for him, before taxes. Isabel's head shot up. She stared at her son as if seeing him for the first time. It was pure, unfiltered shame. You spent, she flipped back to the business tab, adding it up in her head, over $60,000 to make $5,000? You have to spend money to make money, Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. It's about perception. Did you know? Isabel cut him off, her voice suddenly like ice, that Maya was covering 92% of your expenses while you built a perception that lost $55,000 last year. Ethan S. face flushed a deep, mottled red. She makes more money than me. It's only fair she paid more. Then why? Isabel asked, her words slow and deliberate. Did you tell me last month that she was financially reckless? Ethan recoiled. Why did you insist on separating your finances? She continued relentlessly. If you were the one taking everything, why did you complain about her shopping habits while you spent $600 a month on lunch and she paid the mortgage? His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mom, she's twisting things. Am I? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Which part is twisted, Ethan? Which one of these receipts is fake? Which of these bank statements is a lie? He had no answer. Isabel shut the binder with a firm, final thud. She then looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than judgment in her eyes. It was respect. Maya, she said, her voice softer now, may I see your studio? The question was so unexpected, so out of place, I could only nod. Of course. I led the way, leaving Ethan standing alone in the wreckage. Isabel followed me, not as a critic, but as someone who finally understood where the real work was being done. She scanned the room, spotted counters, the organised spice rack, the shining appliances. Her gaze locked on the fridge, on the budget spreadsheet I de-printed and posted there. She marched right over and began to read. Our shared expenses were laid out in perfect columns, bills, dates, and who paid. And next to Mark's name, a glaring yellow highlight showed a long trail of overdue, overdue, overdue. Eleanor covered her mouth. Then, she did something I never would have predicted. She yanked open the refrigerator. The inside was literally split in two. A strip of blue painter's tape ran from top to bottom, dividing my section from Mark's. My side held fresh produce in neat containers, prepped meals, quality deli meats, and all the essentials. It was the fridge of a person who actually grocery shops and cooks. Mark S. side, a carton of milk 5 days past its sell-by date, a few energy drinks, and a pizza box with 2 cold, greasy slices. That was it. No fruit, no vegetables, nothing resembling real food. He was living like a college freshman, not a married man. Eleanor just stared at the stark divide for what felt like forever. Then she shut the door and moved to the pantry. She swung it open. Inside, it was the exact same story, a clear line dividing our shelves. My side was stocked, organised and ready. Jars of grains, pasta, canned goods, baking items, coffee, everything needed to run a household. And on Mark's shelves, 6 containers of fancy protein powder, nothing else. A variety of brands and expensive flavours, but not a single other item. It perfectly captured his contribution to our home for the last 6 years. Eleanor stood there, doors agape, staring at the shelves like they held the answers to every question she'd been afraid to ask. Then, she went to the cabinet under the sink and pulled out the trash. It was overflowing. I'd intentionally left it full since Saturday. The garbage inside told its own grim tale. Charred chicken from Mark S. attempt to cook, slimy, rotted vegetables, an entire bag of rice that was now one solid brick, and blackened garlic. He'd even left herbs in their plastic sleeves, not knowing to remove them. It was all evidence of yesterday's kitchen disaster. It was proof of a man who never learned basic life skills because someone always did them for him. Eleanor's face went from pale to flushed to a shade of deep crimson. She straightened up, spun to face Mark, and then she screamed. It wasn't a gasp, not a small cry, it was a blood-curdling horror film shriek that echoed off the walls and shot out the open window into the quiet afternoon. The sound was so raw, so full of pain. It was the sound of a mother finally seeing that her son was the very man she'd spent her career demolishing in boardrooms. Through the window, I saw our neighbour's head snap up. I saw Mrs. Ford look up from her garden. I saw Mr. Henderson freeze mid-stride on his lawn. Eleanor was trembling in our kitchen, clutching the binder in one hand and that budget sheet in the other. 6 years! Her voice fractured. 6 entire years. Mark took a hesitant step toward her. "Mum, don't," she snapped, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare!" Her voice was shaking now. All her corporate poise was gone, replaced by pure, uncut rage. For 6 years you let her support you. For 6 years you used her income to play house as an entrepreneur while she worked 60-hour weeks. For 6 years you had the audacity to call her careless while she was the only one keeping you afloat. Mark S.'s face was ashen. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that," Eleanor shot back. "The numbers don't lie, Mark. The bank statements don't lie." And this she gestured wildly at the fridge, the pantry. "That disgusting trash, this doesn't lie." Outside, I saw neighbours start to gather. The Fords, the Garcias, even old Mr. Henderson, who avoids drama at all costs. Eleanor's scream had been a siren call, and now they were on our lawn, on the sidewalk, peering through the windows with their phones out. They were definitely recording, probably streaming it live to the community Facebook group that tracks every bit of drama on our block. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Chloe," she said, "I am so sorry." Her apology hung in the air, but I could feel she had more to say. Something else was building up, ready to erupt. She looked at me, her eyes now red and raw. "I had no clue," she said again, her voice wavering. "If I had known." "You couldn't have," I replied, trying to sound calm. He's very good at hiding things. But Eleanor just shook her head, staring at the spreadsheet like it was a guilty verdict in her hands. "Was he hiding it?" she asked, her voice rising. "Or did we just choose not to see?" That question struck me like a physical blow. She was right. Mark hadn't really hidden anything. I was openly supporting him, paying for his business expenses from my account, using my credit cards, and managing our entire life for the world to see. Eleanor had witnessed all of it. The elaborate Sunday dinners I cooked, the immaculate house I kept, all the gifts I bought, which Mark claimed were from both of us. She saw it all and said nothing because accepting the truth was too painful. A woman providing for a man just didn't align with the narrative she preferred. Asking questions would have meant admitting her son wasn't the man she'd raised him to be. "I saw you," Eleanor continued, her voice breaking. "I saw you doing everything, the cooking, the cleaning, the constant planning. I saw Mark do nothing. And I told myself you were just a very capable person, that you were good at it, that it was fine because you seemed content." She covered her mouth as the tears finally began to fall. "But you weren't content, were you? You were exhausted. You were completely taken for granted. And I made it worse, praising your competence instead of calling him out on his laziness." Through the window, the neighbours were still there. They were clustered on the sidewalk and our lawn, phones still aimed at our house. I saw Sarah Ford had moved closer to the kitchen window. Her expression wasn't judging, it was a look of complete recognition, of understanding. How many others had seen what Eleanor saw? How many knew how lopsided things were, but kept quiet because it was just easier? Eleanor stood taller, wiping away her tears. When she looked at me again, her entire demeanour had shifted. "Chloe," she said, with the finality of a CEO making a tough decision, "what do you need from me?" The question stunned me. I had braced myself for a lot of outcomes today, but an offer of help from the one person I was certain would defend her son to the end was not one of them. I glanced outside at our neighbours, watching this family meltdown unfold. "I need you to acknowledge what is real and to say it out loud," I said, my voice steady. "That S all. Just be a witness to the facts." Eleanor gave a single, sharp nod. Then she turned to Mark with a look that made him physically recoil. "I'm booking a room at the Westin for the night," she announced, her voice cold as steel. "When I come back, if I come back, I expect you to be prepared for a very different conversation about this marriage and your role in it." She tucked the binder under her arm like a file she was taking into a hostile takeover and walked toward the door. Mark finally found his voice. "Mom, wait!" No, she didn't even turn around. "You have embarrassed yourself, Mark, in front of your wife, your neighbours, and me. You need to sit with that shame for a while. You need to truly absorb what you've done." She pulled open the front door and strode out onto our lawn, where at least 15 neighbours were standing and staring. The silence was absolute. Eleanor marched right through the crowd with the confidence of a woman who had dominated boardrooms for 3 decades, head high, shoulders back, that binder on full display. The neighbours literally parted for her. I saw Sarah reach out and touch Eleanor's arm as she passed, a small gesture of support, maybe even solidarity. I wasn't sure. Eleanor got into her black Lexus and drove away. For a moment, nobody moved. The neighbours stood there, shell-shocked, processing what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, they started to disperse, but not before I caught their expressions. Sarah looked at me with what seemed like deep respect. Mrs. Garcia from next door looked pensive, as if she was reconsidering something in her own life. Even Mr. Henderson gave me a small nod before he turned and went back inside his house. They all heard Eleanor's scream. They ran over expecting an accident. But they found something else entirely. It was a public reckoning with the truth, a truth spoken so loudly it could never be unsaid or ignored again. Mark and I were left alone in our kitchen, with the dining room in full view and $180 of catered food sitting on the table, completely untouched. "You set this up," Mark finally said, his voice flat. "You wanted this to happen." I just looked at him, really looked at the man I married 6 years ago, the man I had enabled and financed and managed and built my entire world around. And this man had convinced himself I was the one with the issue. I simply told the truth. That's it. The fallout from that was all on you. My mother-in-law let out a sharp gasp. He said, as if I hadn't heard her. She gasped in her own law office, and now our entire family is going to know. I finished. "Yes, they'll know. They'll know what you've been hiding for 5 years. They'll know who really funded your little consulting firm." His face turned a blotchy red. "This is insane. You're making me out to be what?" I asked. "The guy who brought in $52,000 in 5 years while I made $410,000? The husband who demanded separate bank accounts while I paid for our entire life? The man who called his interior designer wife irresponsible with money while she paid for everything?" He was speechless. "The bank statements don't lie, Leo," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Your mother knows that. She's an estate lawyer. She's spent decades advising families on this exact kind of betrayal, financial deceit hiding in a marriage, and she just witnessed it with her own son." "Don't call it that," Leo snapped. "It wasn't deceit. I wasn't trying to, weren't you?" I shot back. "You told me my design studio was a vanity project. You said I needed to be more realistic. For months, you've claimed I spend too much, that you were tired of supporting us." I gestured to the pile of documents on the table. "Every word was a projection, Leo. Every single criticism you levelled against me was really about you." He stared at the papers as if they were about to catch fire. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I thought of the plans for our new home sitting on my drafting table. "Now you deposit your half of the mortgage on the 1st of every month. You buy your own food, you make your own dinner, you run your own life. You learn what it means to be a partner, not a passenger. And what about the 2 of us?" His voice was fragile. I looked at him, slouched in his mother's expensive chair. The man I had bankrolled for 5 years. The man who couldn't hang a picture without my help. "I don't know," I said. "I honestly don't. But I do know that I am done being taken for granted. I'm done being minimized. I'm done funding a fantasy while my actual career is dismissed like some kind of hobby." Leo's phone buzzed, and then buzzed again. A string of texts lit up the lock screen. He picked it up, his eyes flew across the message, and all the blood drained from his face. "What is it?" I asked. "It's from my mom," he said, his voice almost inaudible. He passed me the phone. It was a single, devastating text from Diana. And of course it was. I had watched her leave the room, her face like stone, not saying a word. "What did she say?" I asked, genuinely intrigued now. Leo just shook his head, looking even more pale than before. He whispered, "She's disgusted. She said, she told me I've become a monster." He couldn't even finish. He just handed me the phone. I read the message from Diana. "I have spent 30 years helping families build legacies of trust, and you have spit on everything I stand for. You used her, Leo. You claimed it was a partnership while you secretly emptied her accounts. I don't even know who you are anymore. Then another message appeared, this one from Sarah, our neighbour and Diana's best friend. Diana just phoned me, sobbing. Maya, I am so incredibly sorry. We didn't know. Leo told Mark your studio was barely breaking even and he was carrying you both. He said you were a mess with money. My God, we believed him. I saw another message pop up from a friend down the street, forwarded by Sarah. He's the exact type of husband his mother always warned her clients about. Wow. Sarah's final text read, Maya, if you're seeing this, we see you now. We should have seen the truth all along. I handed the phone back to Leo. His face had turned a shade of sickly green. She told Sarah, the whole neighbourhood is going to know. Yes, I said, they're going to know the truth. That's the risk you take when you build your life with someone else's money. The foundation always cracks. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Who are you? I'm someone who is done being invisible, I told him. Someone who realised her work has value. Someone who got sick of being called a financial drain by the man she was propping up. I walked right past him, heading for the front door. Where are you going? He asked. Home, I replied. To my studio. To work on my projects in peace. To be in a space that's mine without having to manage you and your ego. This isn't over, he said, but his words had no conviction. No, I agreed. It's not, but it is changed, and it is never, ever going back to the way things were. I drove home and went directly into my studio. Eventually, I heard Leo come in downstairs, heard his strained voice on the phone, likely with his mother, who I suspected wasn't picking up. I heard him pacing around the kitchen, opening and closing the barren fridge. Outside, the Chicago skyline dimmed, and our neighbours were starting to share what they now knew. About Diana's shame, about the lie that had finally, and very painfully, been brought into the light. I sat at my drafting table, staring at the blueprints for my newest project. Tomorrow, Leo would have to figure out how to pay his half of a mortgage he'd never even thought about. He'd have to buy groceries and figure out how to work the stove. He'd have to face a neighbourhood that now saw him for exactly who he was. But tonight, in that moment, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not happiness, not revenge, just the quiet, clean relief of a truth that was finally out in the open. The silence in our home that night felt different, not comfortable or warm. It was empty, like a house taken down to the studs, where you can suddenly see every crack in the foundation. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Leo rustling around downstairs. I heard the clink of take-out containers, the scraping of a fork, the refrigerator door opening and closing. Then, nothing. Around midnight, the floorboards creaked on the stairs. He stopped just outside our bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting. Was he going to knock? Was he going to try and talk, to apologise, to make an excuse? The footsteps moved on, down the hallway to the guest room. I heard the door click shut. I finally exhaled, rolling over and pulling the comforter up around me. My bed. My room. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't sharing it with an enemy. Monday morning was overcast and cool. I was up at 5:30, making 1 cup of coffee, getting dressed for the day in the master bathroom without worrying about waking Leo. He was in the spare room, already a separate entity, already learning how to get by on his own. I left for my office at 7:15, same as always. Sarah was by the mailboxes at the end of our cul-de-sac, not trying to look like she was waiting for me, but she was. As I drove closer, her face settled into an expression I couldn't quite read. Sympathy? Curiosity, Maya, she said, her voice low. Got a minute? I put the car in park, leaving the engine running. Of course. She'd glanced back toward our house, then met my eyes. What Diana said about you covering everything, was that the truth? I could have softened it. I could have called it a messy family argument, said things got blown out of proportion, that his mother was just emotional. Instead, I gave her the facts. Every last word of it was true. Sarah's whole demeanour shifted. For how long? 5 years. She let out a soft sound, somewhere between a gasp and a swear word. Mark and I had no idea, she said. We just assumed, you always looked like you had everything so perfectly handled. That was the whole issue, I said quietly. I made it look effortless, so nobody thought to ask if it was fair. Sarah nodded slowly, the understanding dawning on her face. She worked in banking. She understood. She knew what hidden liabilities and unbalanced accounts meant. If you need anything, she said, whilst giving my hand a squeeze, I mean it. Anything. Mark and I are right here. We see you now. That phrase stuck with me all day long. We see you now, as if I'd been invisible in my own life. At the firm, I poured myself into the plans for the new lakefront high-rise, with a sense of clarity that felt new. Client presentations, engineering consults, budget meetings. The work was demanding, fulfilling, and completely mine. No one at my firm ever called me irresponsible with money. Nobody questioned my contributions. Nobody dared take credit for my designs. My assistantess buzzed my intercom around 3 p.m. Maya. You have a personal call on line 2. It's Diana Vance. She said it's important. I picked up the phone, my interest piqued. Diana, it's Maya. Her voice was steadier than it had been in her office, but there was a faint tremble underneath. I wanted to tell you something myself before you heard it through the grapevine. I waited. I've requested a meeting with the CESPA's Ethics Committee, she said, regarding my license, to report my failure to recognize this, to report my failure in my professional and my family duty. I leaned back in my chair, shocked. Diana had always been the absolute definition of professional poise and control. The idea of her turning herself in was like a seismic event. That's a huge step, Diana, I said. It's the only step, she replied. I'm 65 years old. My entire career is built on financial ethics, on protecting clients from exactly the kind of man Leo became. And I let it happen under my own roof. I let it go on because you were so capable. Her voice started to break. I used your competence as an excuse for his lack of character, she continued. I complimented you on how well you managed everything, instead of asking why you had to manage it all by yourself. We were both quiet for a second, connected by the phone line stretching across the city. Can I ask a serious question? Elena finally said, and you have to be totally honest. Do you think you two can get through this, or is this marriage over? It was the exact question I'd been asking myself for days. I have no idea, I admitted. I don't know if I can shrink back into the background, but I also don't know if Ethan is capable of real change, or if he's just scared. That's fair, Elena replied. Totally fair. I told him he has to earn back any kind of relationship with you. The pressure is 100% on him to prove he is different. What was his response? Elena let out a dry laugh. He cried, then got angry, then cried a lot more. He's a wreck, Maya, which is probably right where he needs to be. After the call, I just sat at my desk, staring out at the city. I kept wondering what Ethan was doing. Was he really thinking, or just freaking out? Did he understand what he had lost, or was he still obsessed with what he thought he deserved? On Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed. A notification from my banking app. Ethan had sent $1,650. The memo just said, mortgage, my half. I stared at the screen for a very long time. It was the first time in 6 years he'd paid his actual share on time without me having to beg for it. Thursday, $170 for the utilities. Friday, $280 for his portion of the groceries. Every payment just showed up, with no text, no big explanation. It was just the money, his obligations finally being met. I gave in to curiosity and checked his Instagram. He hadn't posted a single thing since Saturday. 3 days without making content for Ethan, that was an eternity. His last post was that shot of his gym equipment, captioned about his hustle and building a brand. But the comments section was now completely empty. Whatever criticism he got after Sunday, he'd deleted every single word. His follower count had plummeted, from 247,000 down to 198. People were ditching his fitness brand now that everyone knew his empire was bankrolled by his wife. That night, I got home to a spotless kitchen with a note on the counter in Ethan's perfect, careful handwriting. cancelled my high-end gym membership. I'll use the community centre starting next week. $30 a month, not $199. I'm selling my weights and gear online. First therapy appointment is booked for Monday at 4 p.m. We need to leave work a bit early. Signed E. There was no apology. No excuses. Just information. Cold, objective facts. Accountability. I read it over twice, looking for any hint of manipulation. I couldn't find one. Just a man reporting his actions, taking control of his spending, and admitting he needed professional help. It was the most adult thing he had done in years. I folded the note and went upstairs. I opened the desk drawer that held the USB drive with all our financial documents, the proof of 6 long years of complete imbalance. I put Ethan's note right beside it, evidence of him finally hitting rock bottom, and maybe, just maybe, the first tiny step he was taking toward real change. That night, I cooked dinner for one, lemon chicken with roasted veggies and wild rice. I used an ice plate. I sat at the kitchen table, reading a book propped against the salt shaker. I was about halfway through eating when Ethan came home. I heard the garage door, then his footsteps stopping suddenly when he saw me sitting there. "That smells incredible," he said quietly. I didn't even glance up from my book. "There's chicken in the fridge if you want to cook some for yourself." Silence. Then, I don't know how to cook. "There are tutorials on YouTube," I said flatly. "Or the local rec centre has a basic cooking class on Tuesday nights." More silence. Then I heard him opening the fridge. The sound of him digging around. The microwave beeped as he warmed up leftovers from that fancy catered party we never touched. He sat down at the far end of the table. We ate without speaking, him on his phone, me with my book. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't a fight either. Just 2 people in a room, no longer faking a life we didn't have. "I paid the bills," Ethan said finally. "I saw, thank you. It says a lot more than I realised it would be." I just turned a page. "I know. I don't get how you handled it all for so long. The bills, the meals, the cleaning everything, while you were working 60 hours a week." I finally looked up at him. His face was drawn and exhausted. He looked thinner, probably stress, or maybe from having to figure out how to feed himself. "I handled it," I said softly, "because I had to. Because it was obvious you never would." He winced, but he didn't try to argue the point. "I am sorry," he said. "I know it's not enough. I know sorry does to undo 6 years of betrayal," look for the words, "of taking you for granted, of being totally useless, of calling you reckless while you carried all the weight. I closed my book. Sorry is enough. You rewrite. But it's a beginning." "So what should I do?" he asked. "How can I fix any of this?" I just stared at him. At this man I had married, who had become a complete stranger. This man who was possibly, finally, starting to wake up. "You become a different person," I told him. "You learn to cook, to do your own laundry, and to manage your own life. You stop needing me to be your mother and start acting like my partner. You have to prove, over a long time, with consistent actions, that you can contribute just as much as you take. And if I manage all that, then we will see," I said. "But Ethan, I'm not putting my life on hold while you sort yourself out. I'm living for me now. If you want to be a part of that life, you have to earn it, every single day." He just nodded, seeming so much smaller than he did a week ago. Good, I thought. Let him feel what it's like to be small for a change. Let him see how 6 years of being ignored really feels. Ethan finished his microwave dinner quietly. He put his fork down and looked at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Like, for real? We are talking," I said, not lifting my eyes from my book. "I mean," he stopped, and then tried again. "Can we please sit down and have a real conversation about everything?" I marked my page and shut the book. "When? Now or tomorrow? Whenever you re-free." The fact that he asked for my time instead of demanding it felt like a shift. "Tomorrow," I told him. "Saturday after I get back from my run." He nodded, almost looking relieved that I hadn't just rejected him completely. On Saturday morning, I ran 5 miles around our neighbourhood. I ran past Mrs. Gable S. house, and she waved from her garden, past the Patels, who offered a small, knowing smile, even past Mr. Harrison, who actually said, Good morning, Maya. The same neighbours who saw my public humiliation now saw me differently. Not as friends, but as witnesses, people who finally saw me. I got home covered in sweat, feeling more like myself than I had in a very long time. Ethan was at the kitchen table with a notepad. He looked terrible, drained and exhausted, like he hadn't slept for days. He'd lost some weight. His chiseled gym physique was already softening without the endless training sessions he could no longer afford. "Coffee?" he asked, motioning to the French press. I poured myself a cup and sat down opposite him. Then I waited. "I've just started going to therapy," he said. His voice was rough, unsure of itself. "Dr. Morrison has been well. She says making me look at a lot of stuff I really didn't want to see." I just sipped my coffee and stayed quiet. "She made me track my daily activities," Ethan went on. "Everything I do in a normal day, and then assign an hourly value to it, based on its contribution to our life here." He pushed the notebook across the table. I opened it and found pages of crossed-out notes, erased words, and angry scribbles. "I couldn't do it," Ethan said, his voice starting to break. "I couldn't put a value on my time, because almost nothing I do actually creates any value for us." I looked at his messy attempts, at him trying to assign a number to gym time, to Instagram posts, to meal planning he never did, to cleaning he never touched. 2 hours at the gym daily, he continued. That's just for me. It adds nothing but to my own ego. 3 hours a week on Instagram for a business that basically makes no money. Maybe an hour a week, tops, doing anything helpful around our house. He dropped his face into his hands. Everything else is you, Maya. The cooking, the laundry, the bills, the home repairs, all the appointments and planning, all of it is you. I closed his notebook and slid it back across the table. "I called you financially irresponsible," Ethan said, looking up with red, watery eyes. "I actually told myself that. I convinced myself your salary was our money, but anything I made was mine. That you spent too much on shoes while I was investing in my brand." He laughed, but it was a broken sound. "Your entire shoe collection probably cost $2,000 over 6 years. My gym membership alone was $12,000. My supplements cost more than your clothes. My business expenses were $47,000 to earn $3,200. "I know," I said quietly. "I know you know. And that S, what makes all this so." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I am not the victim in this story. It was me. I was the problem, and I didn't see it until my own mother screamed it at me during her anniversary dinner." We sat in silence. From the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed, a normal Thursday night sound. "What are you trying to say, Leo?" I finally asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe that I am starting to understand, that I am trying, that I am—" His voice broke. "That I am sorry. For real, not just saying the words." I stared at him. The man who called me unsupportive while I was paying his rent. The man who was finally maybe seeing the wreck he'd made. "Okay," I said. "I hear you that night," Jenna called. "Drinks tomorrow? We really need to talk." We met at a wine bar on the west side. She already had a glass of Pinot waiting for me. "I am so relieved you're finally seeing him for who he is," she said as I sat down. I just gave her a look. "You've been holding that one in." "I've been biting my tongue for 6 years, Clara," Jenna said. "Watching you just shrink in that relationship. Watching you make yourself smaller so his ego could be bigger. So why didn't you ever say anything?" She let out a sharp, joyless laugh. "Oh, but I did. Many times. Remember that dinner, maybe 4 years ago, when I told you Leo was treating you like his personal banker? And I did. Sort of. A huge fight that had left me seething. You told me I didn't understand," Jenna continued. "That Leo was a visionary under pressure. That a real partner offers support. You said I was being cynical. The memory was clearer now. I remember avoiding her calls for a month after that." "I dropped it then," Jenna said. "Because you had to see it for yourself. You'd convinced yourself that your value was measured by how much you could sacrifice for him, how much of his weight you could carry." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But Clara, your worth was never about what you did for Leo. It was always about you. Brilliant, funny, ambitious, strong. You were the whole package without him." Her voice gentled. He was the one who needed you desperately, and he's twisted it all around to make you think you were the needy one. That truth landed like a punch to the gut. And I just broke down, right there in that noisy wine bar, that awful, heaving kind of crying that makes people stare. Jenna moved to my side of the booth, wrapping an arm around me as I grieved 6 years spent editing myself down to fit into a narcissist's story. I was so naive, I managed to say. You were not naive, Jenna said, her tone firm. You were loyal. You were generous. You saw potential in a man who exploited your kindness. That's not a flaw. That's having a heart. That Friday, Isabel called and asked if we could get lunch. Just the two of us. We picked a small French place downtown, away from our neighborhood gossip mill. Isabel looked frayed. The usual architectural precision in her style was gone. She seemed softer, more tired. I need to explain something, she said after the waiter left, about why I refused to see what Leo was doing to you. I held my breath and waited. When I was just starting my firm, Isabel began, I worked non-stop while Robert was trying to launch his first restaurant. For the first decade of our marriage, I paid every single bill. She slowly stirred her iced tea. My own mother said I was being taken for a ride, that Robert was using me, that I should give him an ultimatum. I defended him like a lioness. I didn't speak to her for nearly 2 years because of it. Isabel looked me straight in the eye. Robert's restaurant eventually became a huge success. We're very secure now. So I told myself my mother had been wrong, that my faith in Robert had been vindicated. She paused. But watching you and Leo, I see now that I was just forcing your life to fit my narrative. I needed Leo to be Robert. I needed your story to prove mine was right, and so I deliberately ignored what was right in front of my face. So what was the difference? I asked, my voice thin. Between your marriage and mine? Isabel's sharp focus returned. Robert was building a business, she said. He worked in a hot kitchen 16 hours a day, coming home smelling of garlic and grease. His restaurant was in the red for years because he reinvested every dime into it, into quality ingredients and paying his staff well. She met my gaze. Leo wasn't building anything real. He was cosplaying as a tech mogul, and you were bankrolling his delusion. There's a universe of difference between backing a dream and enabling a fantasy. The knot of resentment I'd I'd held against Isabel just vanished. What Robert and I built, she went on, was hard, but it was a partnership. We both gave up things. We both struggled. We were a team building a future. Her voice cracked. What you and Leo had was one-sided, and I am so profoundly sorry I didn't see it until it all blew up. I'm sorry I didn't shield you the way I've shielded my own projects for 30 years. She reached out, her hand covering mine. I made excuses for him. I never challenged him. I told you how strong you were instead of asking why you had to be. I made you feel insignificant by praising how well you handled his constant failures. We sat in silence for a minute. Are you going to leave him? Isabel finally asked. I'm not sure, I said, and it was the honest truth. I'm waiting to see if this new leaf is real or just a performance to avoid consequences. That's wise, Isabel said. Whatever you decide, I need you to know I'm in your corner now, yours. Not his, just yours. It was the one ally I never expected, but the one I desperately needed. A mother-in-law who finally chose me over her own child. That evening, I sat in my study, staring at a spreadsheet on my screen. 6 years of financial imbalance, 6 years of my invisible labour. My phone lit up. A text from Leo. Therapy was good today. Dr. Reed suggested couples counselling might be a next step if you'd ever be open to it. No pressure. At all. I just stared at his words for a long time. I typed back, I'll think about it. His response came instantly. Take all the time you need. I'm going to keep working on myself no matter what. I set my phone down and just looked out the window. This was the neighbourhood where our private humiliation had become very public, where Isabel's anger had dragged everything into the light. Things were shifting. Maybe this time it was real, but I still didn't know if it was enough. So I took all the time I needed. Days turned into weeks, then months. Leo stuck with his therapy. He paid his half of the bills. He kept showing up for his job at the Apple store, and I knew it had to kill his ego to go from visionary founder to a tech support guy. He asked about couples therapy twice more. Both times I said, "Not yet," and he just nodded. He didn't argue. That alone felt like a massive change. 6 months after the explosion, I woke up one Sunday smelling coffee. Not the sludge Leo used to make. This smelled rich and warm. I came downstairs and found him at the counter with a French press. He was moving through the process with a quiet intensity. Measure the grounds, bloom the coffee, wait, pour slowly, press evenly. He'd been practicing. "Morning," he said, focused on his task. "Morning," I replied. He filled 2 mugs and passed one to me. I took a sip. It was good, really good. The kind of coffee that says someone actually gave a damn about making it right. "I've been taking that cooking class on Tuesdays," Leo said, more of a status report than conversation. 3 nights a week now. Chef Antoine is teaching us knife skills. How to build a sauce, how to poach an egg without it falling apart. I just nodded, drinking my coffee. "I tried making that risotto recipe last week," he said. "It was a bit crunchy, but a definite improvement." "That's great," I told him. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, drinking coffee like 2 polite acquaintances. "I sold my Peloton yesterday," Leo added. "The one I paid $3,000 for got $600. It's going to my half of next month's mortgage," which, I had to admit, he'd paid on time for half a year now. "The store offered me a promotion," he said. "Full-time lead. It's not much more, but it has health insurance. It's still just $25 an hour, but it's steady." "Are you taking it?" "I have to." "Yeah. I can't keep living off what's left of my savings," he said it simply. No drama, no self-pity, just a statement of fact. We finished our coffee in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just thick with unspoken things. "Can we talk?" Leo asked. "About everything. About what happens now." I set my mug down. "Okay." We sat in the living room. On opposite ends of the sofa, a canyon of space between us. "I need to ask you something," Leo began. "And I need an honest answer, even if it completely destroys me." I just waited. "Do you want to try to rebuild this marriage? Or do you want to get a divorce?" It was the question I'd been avoiding for 6 months. "I don't know," I said, because it was the truth. Mark nodded, like he knew what was coming. "Dr. Evans says I have narcissistic traits," he whispered, "that I built my whole self-worth on being the next big thing. The star athlete, the tech founder, the guy with so much potential instead of building an identity on actually doing something valuable." He stared at his hands. "She said I used your success as my own. Like, if someone incredible like you picked me, I had to be special. But I wasn't special, was I? I was just taking from you." "Yes," I said. "It was time for the truth. You weren't helping a partner build a dream," Mark admitted. "You were funding a grown man's fantasy while you did all the real work. And I had the audacity to call you reckless." His voice broke. "I called you a liability when you were the only thing holding us together. And I don't know how to fix that, Chloe. I don't know how I can undo 6 years if he stopped, taking a sharp breath. Abuse. That's the word Dr. Evans used. Financial abuse. Emotional abuse. I hate hearing it, but I can't say she is wrong." I said nothing. I just let him sit with the reality of it. "I'm not asking you to stay," Mark said, finally meeting my eyes. "I'm asking what you need, what will make your life better. And if your answer is a divorce, I'll sign the papers. No fight, no drama. I will just go. You deserve to make that choice." I looked at him. This was the same man who'd called me a parasite. The man who was maybe, just maybe, changing into someone else. "I need time," I told him. "Real time. Not 6 months, but a year or possibly more. I need to see if this change is genuine or just you panicking." Ryan just nodded. "Okay, I have to see you hold down a job, contribute to this house, and manage your own life without me doing it for you. Okay, you have to stay in therapy, and we need couples counselling the kind that deals with our history and power imbalances, not just how to argue nicely." "I'll make the appointment tomorrow," Ryan said. "I'll find a specialist who deals with what I've done." I took a breath. "And you need to accept that even if we make it, we are never going back to the way we were. I will not be invisible again. I won't run your life while you take the credit. and I will never let you call me a burden while I'm the one paying the bills." "I get it," Ryan said, his voice quiet. "And I don't want to go back. That person I was," he searched for the words. He was pathetic, vile, and so cruel. We sat in silence for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan fiercely said. "Go ahead. Why are you even giving me this chance? After everything I put you through, why didn't you just file for divorce?" I had been thinking about that exact question for months. "Because I need to see if people can actually change," I said finally. "Not just say the words. Not just pretend for a couple of weeks until everything feels normal again, but actually, truly, become a different person." I looked him straight in the eye. "Hans, the man I married 6 years ago, before the ego, before he took me for granted, before this whole mess, that man was worth loving. I want to see if he is still in there somewhere." Tears welled up in Ryan's eyes. "I'm trying to find him too," he whispered. "This morning, 6 months and 2 weeks after that scream, Margaret came over for lunch. But this time was completely different. Ryan was the one doing the cooking. Just a simple roast chicken and some vegetables. It wasn't fancy, but the kitchen smelled amazing, and he actually looked like he knew what he was doing. Margaret showed up at 1 p.m, right on schedule. But she'd left her corporate armour at home. She was in comfortable clothes, wearing a real smile. "Something smells incredible," she said, giving me a hug first. Then she turned and hugged Ryan. "Roast chicken," he said. "Used a trick from Chef Marcus. I'm just hoping it's not raw in the middle." The three of us sat to the table together. Margaret folded napkins, I put out plates, and Ryan carried the food over. The total role reversal felt surreal. We sat down, and Ryan's chicken was actually delicious. Not a 5-star meal, but really solid. The work of somebody who actually took the time to learn. Then Margaret raised her glass of water. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, looking back and forth between us, to the truth, to changing, and to the very hard work of becoming better people. We all clinked our glasses. "I am so proud of you, Ryan," Margaret said, and I could see her eyes were getting misty. "Not for your past successes or future potential, but for doing the work, for admitting you failed and trying to fix it. That's what takes real courage." Ryan's jaw was tight with emotion. "Thanks, Mom." Then Margaret turned to me. "And Lauren, thank you for standing your ground, for refusing to be erased, and for teaching my son and me what a real partnership is meant to look like." After lunch, Ryan started clearing the table. "I've got the dishes," he said when I stood up to help. "You cooked," I said. "Yeah, but you did the dishes for 6 years while I did nothing. I think I can handle one clean-up." Margaret and I went into the living room while Ryan worked in the kitchen. We could hear him washing and putting things in the right cabinets because he'd finally bothered to learn where everything went. "So, how is he, really?" Margaret asked in a quiet voice. "He's better," I said, and I truly meant it. "He's not perfect, but he is better. Paying bills, keeping his job, therapy, learning how to be a partner. He is trying. And how are you?" I had to think about that for a second. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm still deciding if I want to stay married or start over, but the thing is, I'm okay either way. That's what is different now. 6 months ago, I thought my life would be over if the marriage ended. Now, I know I can be great on my own. So if I stay, it'll be my choice, not because I'm stuck." Margaret took my hand and squeezed it. That is the healthiest thing I have heard in years. Later on, after his mom had left, I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at our street. The place where everyone watched us fall apart. Where that one scream made our private disaster very, very public. Ryan came and stood next to me, not touching, just close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me completely. For giving me a chance to become someone better." I looked at him. "Don't thank me yet. We aren't fixed, Ryan. We might never be. This could still end in divorce court." "I know," he said. "But at least if it does, it will be because you chose what was best for you, not because I pushed you away without even seeing what I was losing." We stood there by the window, without speaking. The kitchen where his mother had screamed felt different now. It was no longer a crime scene or a battlefield. It was just a room where 2 people were slowly and painfully learning to be equals. Some stories end with a clean break, a divorce, a fresh start. Ours was still being written, one honest talk at a time, one bill paid, one decent meal cooked, one moment of accountability after another. But that scream, that awful, beautiful, truth-telling scream, that will always be the moment that changed everything. The moment my mother-in-law finally saw her son for who he was. And in our Connecticut suburb, where everybody knows everybody else's business, Margaret's scream became a local legend. It became a reminder that when the truth finally comes out, it can break everything. But sometimes, in that wreckage, you can find the foundation to build something real. If this story of truth and change had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. For me, the most powerful part was Margaret seeing that divided refrigerator and finally getting it. What part hit you the hardest? Let me know down in the comments. And for more incredible stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss what's next.